Carole Middleton took charge. The doting grandmother reportedly decorated Charlotte's future nursery to perfection.
When Carole Middleton arrived at Windsor Castle that crisp autumn morning, she had no idea she was about to witness something that would fundamentally change her relationship with the royal family forever. As Princess Catherine's mother, Carole had always maintained a respectful distance from royal affairs, understanding her place in the complex hierarchy. But what she saw that day would awaken something fierce within her, the protective instinct of a grandmother who would stop at nothing to shield her granddaughter from harm. The invitation to Windsor had come as a pleasant surprise. Queen Camilla had extended a personal invitation for a private family gathering to celebrate Princess Charlotte's recent academic achievements at Lamrock School. It was meant to be an intimate affair, just close family members coming together to honor the young princess's hard work and dedication. Carole had been thrilled to be included, seeing it as a sign that the bridges between the Middleton and Windsor families were stronger than ever. But as Carole would soon discover, not all family gatherings are what they appear to be on the surface. Sometimes the most dangerous moments happen when we least expect them, in the places where we should feel safest, surrounded by the people who are supposed to love and protect us most. The perfect setup. The day had begun beautifully. Carole arrived at Windsor Castle just after 11 o'clock in the morning, greeted by the familiar sight of the ancient stone walls and perfectly manicured gardens. She had visited many times before, but the grandeur never failed to impress her. More importantly, she was looking forward to spending quality time with her beloved granddaughter, Charlotte, who had been excelling in her studies and deserved recognition for her efforts. Catherine and William had arrived earlier with all three children. George was his usual energetic self, running around the castle grounds with the confidence of someone who knew every hidden passage and secret room. Lizzie was more reserved, but equally excited, clutching a small toy airplane he'd brought to show his great-grandmother. And Charlotte, sweet, intelligent Charlotte, was practically glowing with pride over her recent school achievements. The gathering was meant to be relaxed and informal by royal standards. Camilla had suggested they use the smaller oak room rather than one of the grand state rooms, creating a more intimate atmosphere. Tea service was set for mid-afternoon, with Charlotte's favorite cucumber sandwiches and freshly baked scones from the castle kitchens. Everything seemed perfect. Carole spent the first hour catching up with Catherine and William, hearing all about the children's recent activities and milestones. Charlotte had received top marks in her history project about medieval castles, particularly fitting given their current location. She'd also been selected for her school's advanced reading program, something that filled Carole with immense pride. Her granddaughter was not only beautiful, but brilliant, with the curiosity about the world that reminded Carole so much of Catherine at that age. The first warning signs. It was during the pre-launch mingling that Carole first noticed something wasn't quite right. Charlotte had been animatedly telling a story about her history project when Camilla approached their small group. The little girl's face immediately changed, her bright smile fading to a more reserved expression. It was subtle, the kind of change that might go unnoticed by most adults, but Carole had spent decades reading children's faces and emotions. Something had shifted. "Hello, Charlotte dear," Camilla said with what appeared to be a warm smile. "I do hope you're not getting too excited. We wouldn't want you to wear yourself out before lunch." The words seemed innocent enough, even caring on the surface. But there was something in the tone, a slight edge that made Charlotte's shoulders tense slightly. Carole watched as her granddaughter's natural exuberance dimmed just a little more. "I'm fine, Granny Camilla," Charlotte replied politely, her voice smaller than it had been moments before. "Of course you are, dear. Just remember to use your inside voice. This is a very old castle with very old walls." Camilla's laugh sounded genuine, but Carole caught something else underneath it, something that made her grandmother's instincts prickle with unease. Charlotte nodded obediently and moved closer to her mother. The change was so gradual, so carefully executed that anyone not paying close attention would have missed it entirely. But Carole was paying attention. She had built her entire business around understanding people, reading between the lines, and recognizing when something wasn't quite right. And right now, every fiber of her being was telling her that something was very wrong indeed. The lunch incident. The formal lunch was served in the castle's smaller dining room, an elegant space with tall windows overlooking the gardens. The table was set with fine china and crystal, creating an atmosphere of refined celebration. Charlotte was seated between her grandfather Charles and her great-aunt Anne, both of whom had always shown her nothing but kindness and encouragement. The conversation flowed easily at first. Charles was particularly animated, sharing stories from his recent royal engagements and asking each of the children about their interests and activities. Charlotte brightened considerably under her grandfather's attention, regaling him with detailed accounts of her school projects and extracurricular activities. "And did you know, Grandpa, that Windsor Castle has been home to 39 monarchs?" Charlotte said proudly, having clearly memorized this fact for the occasion. "How wonderful that you've learned so much about our family's history," Charles replied with genuine delight. "You must tell me more about your project." As Charlotte began to enthusiastically describe her research methods and findings, Carole noticed Camilla's expression growing increasingly tight. The queen consort was still smiling, but it was the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. When Charlotte paused to take a breath, Camilla seized the moment. "That's quite enough history lessons for now, don't you think?" she interjected smoothly. "Perhaps we should let the grown-ups have a turn to speak." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Carole watched as her granddaughter's face flushed with embarrassment, her bright enthusiasm extinguished as quickly as a candle in the wind. The little girl immediately fell silent, folding her hands in her lap and staring down at her barely touched plate. Charles looked confused by the sudden change in atmosphere, glancing between his wife and his granddaughter with obvious concern. Catherine and William exchanged a meaningful look across the table, but neither spoke immediately. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Anne stepped in with a question about George's football activities, steering the conversation in a safer direction. But Carole had seen enough. The protective instincts that had guided her through decades of raising her own children and building a successful business were now fully activated. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a generational difference in communication styles. This was systematic, deliberate, and unacceptable. The breaking point. After lunch, the family moved to the garden terrace for coffee and afternoon tea. The October weather was crisp but sunny, perfect for spending time outdoors. The children were given permission to explore the gardens under the watchful eye of their protection officers, and Charlotte seemed to recover some of her natural spirits as she ran around with her brothers. Carole was enjoying a conversation with Catherine about upcoming family plans when she noticed Charlotte approaching the terrace alone. The little girl had picked a small bouquet of late-blooming flowers and was clearly excited to share her discovery with the adults. "Look what I found," Charlotte called out cheerfully as she climbed the stone steps. "There are still roses blooming by the south wall." "How lovely, darling," Catherine replied warmly. "Why don't you show everyone?" Charlotte beamed and began to approach the group of adults, her small hands carefully cradling the delicate flowers. But before she could reach them, Camilla's voice cut through the afternoon air like a knife. "Charlotte, stop right there." The command was sharp enough to freeze the little girl in her tracks. "Look at the state of you. You're covered in dirt, and your dress is torn. What will people think?" Carole looked at her granddaughter and saw nothing more than a child who had been playing outdoors, exactly as children should. Charlotte's dress had a small grass stain on the skirt, and her shoes were slightly muddy, but she was hardly covered in dirt. More importantly, they were at a private family gathering, not a state function. "I'm sorry, Granny Camilla," Charlotte whispered, her excitement completely deflated. You were just thinking about yourself instead of considering how your appearance reflects on the family," Camilla continued, her voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "A proper young lady doesn't go running about like a wild thing, getting filthy and tearing her clothes. Perhaps you should go inside and have your nanny clean you up before you embarrass us further." The cruelty of the words hit Carole like a physical blow. She watched as her granddaughter's face crumpled, tears threatening to spill from her bright blue eyes. Charlotte's small hands released the flowers, which scattered across the stone terrace in a heartbreaking metaphor that wasn't lost on anyone present. That was the moment Carole Middleton decided she had heard enough. Every maternal and grandmaternal instinct in her body screamed that this had gone too far. Her beloved granddaughter, a sweet, intelligent, well-behaved child who brought joy to everyone around her, was being systematically torn down by someone who should have been building her up. The confrontation. Carole stood up from her chair with the kind of quiet dignity that had served her well in business and in life. She walked directly to Charlotte, knelt down despite her designer outfit, and began gathering the scattered flowers. "These are beautiful, sweetheart," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have such a good eye for finding lovely things. And you look absolutely perfect, like a little girl who's been having fun in the garden, exactly as you should be." She helped Charlotte brush a few leaves from her dress, then stood and placed a protective arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. Only then did she turn to face Camilla directly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Carole said, her voice calm, but unmistakably firm. "Charlotte has done nothing wrong. She's been behaving exactly as any happy, healthy child should behave at a family gathering." Camilla's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I'm sorry, but I don't think you understand the standards we—" "I understand perfectly," Carole interrupted, something she had never done to a member of the royal family before. "I understand that you've spent the better part of this afternoon criticizing and belittling my granddaughter for the crime of being an enthusiastic, intelligent child, and I'm here to tell you that it stops now." The terrace fell completely silent. Even the birds seemed to pause their afternoon singing. Catherine and William watched in stunned amazement as Carole Middleton, always so careful to respect royal protocol, faced down the queen consort with the fierce protectiveness of a lioness defending her cub. "Carole," Camilla began, her voice taking on a warning tone that had cowed many people over the years, "I think you're overreacting to—" "No." Carole's single word cut through the air with surprising force. "I'm not overreacting. I'm responding appropriately to watching someone systematically attempt to crush a child's spirit. Charlotte is 8 years old. She's bright, curious, kind, and well-behaved. She's also my granddaughter, and I will not stand by and watch anyone make her feel small or ashamed for simply being herself." Charles had risen from his seat and was moving toward them, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation unfolding on his terrace. But Carole wasn't finished. "I've spent my entire adult life building up children's confidence, not tearing it down. I've watched Charlotte flourish under the love and encouragement of her parents, grandparents, and teachers. She's a remarkable little girl with a bright future ahead of her, and she deserves to be celebrated, not constantly corrected and criticized." Camilla's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I was simply trying to help her understand proper behavior, by telling her she's embarrassing the family, by making her feel ashamed of her natural curiosity and joy." Carole's voice remained controlled, but her words carried the weight of absolute conviction. "That's not teaching proper behavior. That's emotional manipulation, and it has no place in any family, royal or otherwise." The aftermath. What followed was perhaps the most uncomfortable silence in Windsor Castle's long and eventful history. Carole stood her ground, one arm still protectively around Charlotte, while Camilla struggled to formulate a response that might salvage the situation. Charles looked between the two women with obvious distress, clearly torn between his loyalty to his wife and his growing understanding that something genuinely problematic had been occurring. Catherine and William remained seated, but their body language spoke volumes. They were watching their daughter's grandmother fight a battle they perhaps should have fought themselves, and the realization was written clearly across their faces. It was Charlotte herself who finally broke the silence, looking up at her grandmother with eyes full of gratitude and something that might have been relief. She whispered, "Thank you, Grandmama." Those simple words seemed to unlock something in everyone present. Catherine rose quickly and moved to her daughter's other side, creating a protective barrier around the little girl. William followed, his face set in the kind of expression that left no doubt about where his loyalties lay. "I think," Catherine said quietly, "it might be best if we called it a day." Charles nodded slowly, his usual diplomatic demeanor struggling to reassert itself in the face of what had just occurred. "Perhaps that would be wise. We all seem to need some time to process." Camilla looked around at the faces surrounding her, Charlotte's tear-stained but grateful expression, Carole's unwavering protective stance, Catherine and William's united front, and Charles's obvious discomfort with the entire situation. For perhaps the first time in years, she found herself genuinely at a loss for words. The drive home. The ride back to the Middleton family home was quiet at first. Charlotte sat between her parents in the back seat, while Carole drove, her mind racing with everything that had just occurred. She had never imagined she would find herself in direct confrontation with a member of the royal family, let alone the Queen Consort. But as she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Charlotte's more relaxed expression, she knew she had done the right thing. "Grandmama." Charlotte's small voice broke the silence. "Yes, sweetheart." "Was I really being bad today?" Carole pulled the car over safely and turned to face her granddaughter directly. "Charlotte, listen to me very carefully. You were not being bad. You were being exactly what you should be. A curious, enthusiastic, intelligent little girl. Don't ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of those wonderful qualities." Catherine reached over and took her daughter's hand. "Grandmama is absolutely right. You were perfect today, just as you always are." "But Granny Camilla said—" "Granny Camilla was wrong," William said firmly. "And that's not something we say lightly about any adult, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, too. What she said to you today was a mistake, and it won't happen again." Charlotte nodded slowly, and Carole could see the little girl processing this information. Children are remarkably resilient, but they're also incredibly perceptive. Charlotte had understood, even at her young age, that something hadn't been right about the day's interactions. Having the adults in her family validate those feelings and protect her from further harm was exactly what she needed. Immediate consequences. The conversation that followed was one of the most important in the history of both families. Catherine and William had already decided that Charlotte would not be attending any private gatherings with Camilla without one of her parents present. They had also agreed that if any similar incidents occurred in the future, they would address them immediately rather than hoping they would resolve themselves. Charles, to his credit, called Carole personally the following day. The conversation was awkward but necessary, with the future king acknowledging that the situation had been handled poorly and offering assurances that steps would be taken to prevent any recurrence. "Carole, I want you to know that I deeply value your family's place in our lives," he said. "Charlotte is precious to all of us, and she should never be made to feel otherwise." Camilla herself never called. Whether this was due to pride, embarrassment, or simply an inability to acknowledge wrongdoing, Carole never knew. But the absence of any direct communication spoke volumes about the Queen Consort's attitude toward the entire situation. In the weeks and months that followed, subtle but significant changes became apparent in how royal family gatherings were structured and supervised. Charlotte was never again left alone with Camilla, and when they were in the same room, other family members made sure to stay close and engaged in conversations with the young princess. More importantly, Charlotte herself began to bloom in ways that surprised even her parents. The constant underlying anxiety that none of them had fully recognized, the way she had been slightly more subdued at royal events, more careful with her words, more hesitant to share her enthusiasms, began to disappear. She returned to being the bright, confident, curious child she had always been at home and at school. Carole's relationship with her granddaughter deepened significantly after that day. Charlotte understood, even at her young age, that her grandmother had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. The bond between them became even stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and unconditional love. The business community also took notice of Carole's actions, though few outside the family knew the specific details of what had occurred. Word spread through certain circles that Carole Middleton had stood up to the Queen Consort herself when her granddaughter was being mistreated. Rather than damaging her reputation, this only enhanced it. People saw her as someone who lived by her principles regardless of the personal cost. The broader message, what happened at Windsor Castle that October day, was about more than one grandmother protecting one child. It was about the fundamental responsibility that all adults have to nurture and protect the children in their lives, regardless of social status, family dynamics, or personal relationships. Carole Middleton's actions sent a clear message that resonated far beyond the walls of the royal residences. No child deserves to be systematically criticized, belittled, or made to feel ashamed of their natural enthusiasm and curiosity. Not even, or perhaps especially not, a child born into one of the world's most scrutinized families. The incident also highlighted the unique challenges faced by children in high-profile families. While Charlotte enjoys privileges that most children can only dream of, she also faces pressures and expectations that no 8-year-old should have to navigate. Having adults in her life who prioritize her emotional well-being over social conventions or family politics is not just beneficial, it's essential. Looking forward, today, Princess Charlotte continues to thrive as a confident, intelligent, and joyful child. She excels in her studies, enjoys a wide range of activities, and maintains close relationships with all the loving adults in her life. The events of that autumn day have become part of her family's history, not as a source of shame or division, but as a reminder of how fiercely she is loved and protected. Carole Middleton has never publicly discussed what happened at Windsor Castle, and she likely never will. But those who know her well understand that she would do it again without hesitation if circumstances required it. The role of grandmother is sacred to her, and protecting her grandchildren's happiness and self-worth will always take precedence over social expectations or protocol. The relationship between Camilla and the Middleton family remains cordial, but more distant than it once was. Public appearances continue to show unity and respect, but the easy warmth that once existed has been replaced by something more carefully managed. Some bridges once burned can be rebuilt, but never quite restored to their original strength. Perhaps most importantly, the entire family learned valuable lessons about communication, boundaries, and the importance of speaking up when something isn't right. Children are always watching and learning from the adults around them, and Charlotte learned that day that she has people in her life who will fight for her no matter what the cost. What would you have done in Carole Middleton's position? Do you think she was right to confront the Queen Consort so directly? Or should she have handled the situation differently? How do you think families should balance respect for hierarchy with the need to protect children from emotional harm? Share your thoughts about this remarkable display of grandmotherly courage and the important lessons it teaches us all about standing up for what's right, regardless of the personal consequences. What would you have done in Carole Middleton's position? Do you think she was right to confront the Queen Consort so directly? Or should she have handled the situation differently? How do you think families should balance respect for hierarchy with the need to protect children from emotional harm?